it's the meek and the weak who rules the society, and as a result we find ourselves in systems that seek to chain us. And under that culture, any technology that comes with the potential for those programmable elements that could surveil us and track us and curtail our access to services is incredibly frightening. And let's be honest, it's already happening with or without the technology. In the last year, we've seen people having access to finance removed because of their political views. Because at the flip side of this coin is an opportunity for everyone. We need a great awakening. Some of the landscapes of the financial system are changing in front of our eyes, and it's really important that now we start to take stock of these changes, and we'll be covering the latest developments as it pertains to central bank digital currencies and their implications and the wider changes in the financial landscape. But we'll also look at some of the optimism and hope in the market and opportunities to take full sovereignty of our financial future, Sam. So there's lots happening in the world right now. It's been a couple of weeks since we've sat down to talk about what's happening, but as always, there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, great to be back, Dan. There's lots to unpack, and absolutely, we're going through a massive shift, and it's important to understand that shift is happening. And rather than being a victim of it, we need to look at it and see how we position ourselves, because this is a paradigm shift in the whole financial system, Web3, blockchain, all that goes with it. There's a huge technological shift happening as well. It's important that we are proactive, get educated, and see how we position ourselves so we're not just in a victim mentality, because there is lots we can do, but again, we have to get moving ourselves.
Yeah, and as we'll discuss throughout today's episode, the hard reality is there are times to prepare, and that time is now. In fact, that time was yesterday. And as we've been talking throughout the last few months, and we'll share some of the developments over the last few months since we've been working together, Sam, on this show and within our programs, it's easy to turn a blind eye when the noise is low in the marketplace. And now that noise is heating up, everyone's paying attention. But really the best time to start to get prepared is when that noise is low, because you can start to see the signal. So we'll talk about that importance of preparedness throughout this episode. But really, it's not too late, but really it's time to start paying attention, which is one of our core messages today. But I'm gonna take us through some of the key developments that have occurred since our last session. I'm going to share my screen and bring up a couple of news stories for you. So this is in the CNN business report from Wednesday this week. Jamie Dixon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, major global bank, issued a stark warning to Wall Street this week. Inflation could rise further and recession's not off the table. We've talked in previous episodes how the narrative was about this soft landing. And in many ways, if you look at all of the data, that kind of soft landing has occurred, but now you're seeing headlines that are blending the word soft landing and potential recession. They're juxtaposing the two, and they're still talking up, where almost like they're asking, where is this pesky recession, as though they're kind of corralling this thing to happen, because there's obviously some motive behind it. But reading this report, I got really wound up seeing some of the language here. A lot of things out there are dangerous and inflationary. Again, that's safetyism. Be prepared. Now, I don't disagree with the idea of getting prepared, and it's certainly important to confront the possibility of another recession. But this idea that everything is dangerous and everything's a crisis is such a lurid response to everything. But here's where I got even more wound up, Sam. Governments across the globe, not you and I, need more money. They need more money to fund the green economy, to remilitarize and address the energy crisis. And all of that will be inflationary. So the governments are going to take your money. They're going to take your money to fund their global wars and to fund their agendas and their manufactured crisis, all for your own good. And you're going to be the one that pays for it and suffers for their aims. I mean, Sam, how do you feel when you see it?
Yeah, I think it's you can look at it with a discerning eye and spin what's being said there, which is, they're saying, in a sense, be prepared for what the pain they want to inflict on people. I'd like to spin and say, yeah, be prepared to position yourself better, because when you understand what's going on, you can do that. And exactly that, Dan. We've them saying we need more money. Where's that money going to come from? They're going to print it out of thin air, quantitative easing. And anybody is not clear about how that system works. We've got an episode on how they create money out of thin air, and how, even if you're not aware of it in terms of extra taxation or payment stimulus, payments that way to go into governments, you are actually being robbed by value by the sheer level of money printing. And there are absolute ways you can protect yourself against that, which we'll come to later. That's why people understand when there's huge money printing going on or going to come, people move the asset side of the equation. That's why we get bull runs in asset classes. often because of the extreme money printing. So again, rather than take that and just they want to also say, be prepared for the fear we're going to create and the measures we're going to do. I'd say be prepared that you understand that's going to happen and take good steps yourself.
Oh yes,
Which are good
absolutely.
steps, and that's what's interesting, Dan. Regardless of when that plays out, how they plays out, the good steps are good steps to take anyway to improve your situation, become more sovereign, take more control back. So it's all about being not a passive victim of the pain they've inflicted and the measures they will then, bring themselves to try and remedy the problem they created in the first place. You need to take as much control back into your own destiny and your own power in your own hands. And so always looking at that and getting out the fear, because those articles are about fear, Dan, and about giving you paralysis.
Absolutely, and I will confess, straight into anger, frustration, some swear words in my head that I won't say out loud on the show. But you're absolutely right, because at the flip side of this coin is an opportunity for everyone. These moves are not reserved for those in power and the great elite. This is the dangerous mentality that comes, is that they are doing this to us, and therefore we are the victims in this mortal journey. The reality is we have the same opportunities if we know how to navigate them, which is exactly why we're doing this type of work, to help people understand what's happening. So I'm going to move on to talk about another point there that you mentioned, Sam, because this is entirely relevant to what you were saying. A fiery public hearing on the digital euro sees experts diverge on key issues. Well, firstly, important that there is some debate. Thank goodness. It does assure me to a degree that there is some dissenting voices amongst the pot within the Eurozone. This was just from earlier in the week on a debate around the digital euro. Obviously, the digital euro is a plan for a retail central bank digital currency. Now, here is one of the commentators saying an invasive form of public intervention, and it certainly is invasive, and it certainly is a public intervention, would only be justified if clear evidence were to emerge of a malfunctioning in the present system. But this is not in sight at the moment. Now, this is a contradiction in terms. I would say, okay, the system is working beautifully for those who benefit from it, but the reality is it is skewed towards those in power. So you would argue that it is working perfectly. But again, later on in the article, what we see is another commentator saying what we're seeing is this gradual decline of the physical euro and people shifting to risky private digital currencies, things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which is one more reason why it's useful to have a public currency. So they're leveraging the growth in decentralized finance to utilize that growth as a reason to introduce central bank digital currencies, the classic problem reaction solution.
And also playing on the fear, Dan. So for people who aren't educated, like we said, if you get educated about the market, you understand the natural volatility and the growth, but they are leveraging the kind of view of somebody who isn't clued up about decentralized digital currencies or digital assets, leveraging that fear, saying we're going to make a safe one. And I always talk about that's that idea, that false idea of safety, which is a running theme over the last 3 years, offering you a safety that's quite the opposite. And it's interesting. It's like we often talk about people feel safe sat in fiat currency if they don't understand the makeup of fiat currency and the way it's created out of thin air and the unlimited supply. And yet they're scared of assets that are growing because of a scarcer supply and different tokenomics. So again, it's that false idea of safety. So stay in this one. It's safe. It's safe. They control it. They control the supply, and they're robbing you by stealth because you don't realize it. So it's the old classic feeling like you're in the straight line chart. I always do as one, rather than because you're scared of an asset chart that may have volatility but does have growth in it. So again, they're leveraging those things, Dan. Exactly right. Those two aspects, leveraging the interest in these emerging spaces, but also leveraging the fear to say, hang on, we're going to create a safe version for you.
Absolutely, and that's the classic paradigm that we're dealing with. Now, I'm going to bring up some additional news stories. Give me a moment. I'm just going to pull up my screen here, building on this point around the central bank digital currencies, because I will say I've had great fears around what this could bring for our freedoms when it comes to our privacy and our own ability to own and manage our own finances. But it's quite clear that these things are happening. And the more I read into it, the more concerned I become. And I'm going to talk about some ideas that I have in terms of how we can challenge this, because it is a course set in motion, as we'll see in a minute. But the Bank of International Settlements, the Bank of Banks Digital Euro project enters in preparation phase. So despite those initial concerns that, it's steamrolling ahead as these things do. And then another article on Bloomberg here, China's digital currency could challenge Bitcoin and even the dollar, positioning China's digital yuan as, that potentially, I think, the new reserve currency, the new global reserve currency. Clearly the dollar is under threat. People are saying it could be BRICS, or maybe it's the Chinese digital yuan. But within this article, which you can't see now, unfortunately, it's blurred out, but and I don't pay for Bloomberg. I try to avoid my expenditure on mainstream media where possible.
Funding that beast.
But it goes on to talk about the dystopian possibilities of programmable currency, meaning that the government can determine all sorts of incentives and rewards for spending on certain money, or all kinds of punishments for spending your money on other things. Creating this kind of traffic light system of how you use your funds, or even the ability to surveil every transaction you make. They know when you're in Starbucks, what coffee you're ordering, and when.
Yeah.
Not only do they know your physical location, they know who you're with and how you're spending your money. And this entire social credit system could emerge. Bloomberg, mainstream media, talking about the risks of this, yet somehow still not cautioning and warning in the face of this emerging digital euro and the digital pound, which we've talked about in previous episodes, not joining the dots. This is all contained within the same framework. And I want to showcase a chart which shows just how rapidly these things are moving. And Sam and I have covered this in the previous episode. This is the CBDC tracker, cbdctracker.org. You can see, based on these colors, how far advanced. This is the majority of the world now. You can see at some stage either research, proof of concept, pilot, or even launched in some cases. So this is coming. It's a course set in motion, and we are asleep at the wheel. And I want to share, before I come back to you, Sam, just a really interesting commentary. Now, this is from Reddit. It's like, it's not even on a par with Wikipedia for user generated. It's even beyond Wikipedia for user generated content. In fact, Wikipedia is now captured and controlled. But really interesting commentary here. Conclusions after reading the Digital Euro Prototype Summary Report. Here's the piece I want to draw out here. It's fully centralized, includes enough backdoors that they can change the terms once target adoption is reached. Programmability and conditional payments will be in it, but probably restricted until they're ready to spring them on an unsuspecting public. Surveillance will initially be covert, but the tools are there to do mass surveillance via big data. Big regulatory exceptions will be carved out to weaken privacy and allow it for the right reasons. Yeah. And it goes on to say banks will be incentivized. They'll be given a piece of the cake to make this thing happen. There'll be zero transparency on the potential monetary policy that comes to it. Issuance will be completely centralized. And this really points the direction of this, the risks of this. And it even says the potential for massive money printing is there from the start. Absolutely. All it takes is another crisis for the central banks to start utilizing it. So this to me puts it on heightened alert. Again, I'm not drawing into fear and going into panic, because that doesn't serve anything. But my awareness of these things is becoming heightened. And it's about, how do we understand what's happening? Firstly, understand what's happening. How do we hedge against it? And how do we prevent it?
Absolutely, Dan. And you see very clear there, it's a reiteration of the same fiat system, with all the extra tools of control and surveillance that go with it. So it's the same game. And again, the reboot, the financial reset, is clearing the decks, but starting that game again, which still benefits the 1%. So they still control supply, they still control absolute monetary policy, but we've got that extra top-down imposition of smart contracts. And I absolutely concur with that analysis, and it ties into what you pulled up with Bloomberg there, Dan. These concerns are getting out there more and more, absolutely, because people like us, loads of people are talking about them. So the mainstream media has to address them, and they're doing that. But it does tie into my thesis, which I've always talked about, that it is not going to happen in a dystopian way overnight.
Yeah,
it's going to be heavily incentivized. There'll be many reasons to adopt it. And if you're not aware of bigger agendas, it's still incentivized for people who are slightly aware. But if you're not aware, then you might walk into it blindly. But even for those people, after what we're seeing being squeezed for a number of years with all this, they want to squeeze people as much as they can, there will be a little bit of an economic boom. There will be handouts. There will be some universal basic income. There will be incentives. And although we're absolutely spot on to sound the alarm of where it's going, where they want it to go, it will not look like that in the first iteration, or maybe even for a few years, Dan, because people won't go for that. And you're absolutely right. It can be almost identical, because as we say, most of the money in the world is in digital format. It's not in central bank digital format yet with all the smart contract and blockchain technology, but it is still digital. So it won't look very different. And therefore, if it's incentivized and people being squeezed, and understandably, the basic need is to, pay for family, your children, your shelter, your food, your needs. If you've been squeezed, then absolutely, who's going to, are the majority going to turn down this new system where they might actually get a bit of financial relief come through? And, it won't be straight away, you can't do this, you can't do that, because people wouldn't go for that. But as we know over time, in small measures, the possibilities are all there and they can bring it in. But as you said, Dan, with these perma crisis narratives, always for the greater good. We've seen how a lot of people reacted to ideas that we're not for in terms of freedom for the greater good in the last 3 years. They've got many, many ways to get this into the system. So that's where I like to give it what I view as a realistic view of, is it easy to hold back? Will people massively reject them? Well, they've got lots of ways to try. I hope that people do push back, and that certainly when any caveats come in, there's mass pushback, and we look at other alternatives, which we're doing already. But hopefully, more people will start to do that, because it'll be a dance. The more dystopian they get, more controls, the more people will be pushed to look to other solutions. Which is why we are the pioneers in that space of having these discussions. All the people are interested in looking at and trying to be prepared ahead of time for that potentiality. But it's really important to understand that, Dan, and that's why I think the mainstream are addressing some of those concerns, but they're not doing it in the way they should do. Obviously, they're covering them, but they're saying, don't worry, that's a potentiality. We're only against it, and it could be rolled out saying we've addressed all those issues. But as we know, how quickly can things flip flop? And the other aspect I want to just touch on was, you talked about, we don't necessarily need it unless there's a real big catalyst to bring these CBDCs in. Well, you can create a catalyst. They can create a catalyst whenever they want. One of the big potentialities we talked about in a previous episode was this idea of a cyber attack. Potentially, Russian hackers which vowed to take down the Western financial system, and be understood whether it's a real cyber attack or a complete false flag by inside agencies. That is a possibility with the financial system as it is today, in its iteration of being on centralized servers rather than being decentralized ledger technology, which is the new financial system on the blockchain. So it is a genuine solution to that problem. So again, there are lots of ways on top of just wanting to bring this in to bring in those shock catalysts. Okay, we need this. We're actually going to sort out a problem, and it could be, it is a genuine. I've always said it's a genuine technological advance used in the right hands with the right intention. Doesn't have to enslave anybody. Can actually be a much more secure, fairer, with chosen privacy. But it's obviously the technology is neutral. But if your intent is to control and surveil, you can use it for that. And that's where being really aware of that and thinking, hang on, do I want to harness the better side of this decentralized technology, Web3, or do I be passive and become a victim? And many people, unfortunately, if they don't wake up to it, will be blocked and chained by blockchain technology. But it has those spectrums within the technology, Dan. It has, I always say this, the antithesis at either end. They are building the antithesis of what's also being built with blockchain, which is decentralized, greater freedom, greater privacy, greater sovereignty. So those two things exist within the same tech. And we know where they want to go. Where do we want to go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points that I would pick up and draw upon, your initial opening points around how at the beginning, and I concur, the CBDCs won't feel any different to fiat currency. You won't probably notice any different. You'll probably be using the same tools to transact.
Under the bonnet.
Under the bonnet.
Change, yeah.
Yeah, so within the same Reddit article, actually, one of the responses was this. They're taking all the power of the blockchain and corrupting it with backdoors, centralization, unlimited supply. It's basically just fiat with extra steps. Goes on to say that it will either be so similar to fiat that we don't notice any difference, or just an accounting tool for the European Central Bank, or it does have the creepy surveillance stuff. It'll have all the same flaws that fiat does, and people will continue to use multiple methods of transacting like they do nowadays. So the point is, people will see it as this normalized tool. And of course, the power structures are so good at making people believe that it's being done for the greater good. We saw that throughout COVID.
Exactly.
We saw it with Ukraine, and then now the situation in Gaza. It's like, you go over here, you be one of the good people with us for the good reasons. And unfortunately, most people will succumb to that. We are so passive in our consumption of information. We're no longer awake or conscious of the way our minds are being manipulated. And therefore, the idea that all of a sudden everyone's going to wake up and see the risk to their freedom, quite frankly, I don't see it. I just think people will think that they're doing the right thing. Our money's going to help us to stop spending. We're going to have these carbon credits, which is going to help us make a difference to the environment. And we're all going to have a lovely, it's all going to be so good. And we're just going to walk freely walk into this cage.
Exactly. The carbon tracker will all be about being, I've said this, Dan, I've got Contact Australia's shown me the carbon tracker in their banking app, and it's about being a good citizen, and again, that leveraging that is huge. And for a younger generation being brought up on that kind of narrative very powerfully in the school system and the university system, is extremely powerful. It's an emotional blackmail of sorts. Are you a good person? Are your actions, and that's where they have got so many tools. So it's being aware of that, being realistic about how many ways to come in, rather than it being an overnight. Suddenly you've got a social credit score. People won't go for that. No.
No, and your other point there around, I've lost my train of thinking. There was a related point you were making that I was going to riff off because it will come to me. I've lost my train of thought, but let me take you on another strand. So it brings up another critique, which is often what we see, and I think it's a very real one. In fact, here's where I was thinking.
Yep.
If your point around this technology has come to me now, this point around technology being neutral, this is key, because technologically, what it represents using the blockchain technology and different forms of different advanced technology, which we've talked about here on the podcast before, they actually offer greater interoperability, greater speed of transaction, potentially greater security, potential ease and accessibility of payments, liberating finance for people who previously didn't have access to finance. So all of these things will be mobilized and leveraged as some of those key benefits. But the point I'm making is the technology itself, during other times, I think, Sam, because we don't live in a culture of freedom right now. If you're in any doubt about that, if you're in any doubt, you obviously had your eyes closed during COVID. People are quite happy to take away, to have their freedoms eroded, and the culture right now is pervasive towards this centralization, sterilization, and surveillance culture. So launching a technology that has this potential capability is riskier than any other time in recent modern history, I think. We've lived in times where freedom was valued. We've lived in times where courage was a virtue that was celebrated. But now it's the meek and the weak who rules the society. And as a result, we find ourselves in systems that seek to chain us. And under that culture, any technology that comes with the potential for those programmable elements that could surveil us and track us and curtail our access to services is incredibly frightening. And let's be honest, it's already happening with or without the technology. In the last year, we've seen people having access to finance removed because of their political views. We've seen PayPal accounts shut down and cancelled. We've seen people demonetized on digital platforms because of their public life or their private view, or their public views. So we don't need a central bank digital currency for a social credit system. It's already happening.
You're absolutely right, Dan. It's so important. And what's interesting, that same technology that people rightly fearful of its use in terms of CBDC is also what's helped those very people you spoke about in the last 3 years. So the decentralized nature of assets like Bitcoin and being able to transact in a decentralized manner has, as we know people personally now, they've been able to trade, help people, whether it was with health products, with services, with education. They've been able to trade worldwide despite being, exactly that, it's despite being already a victim of the social credit score, through being deplatformed from all the legacy banking system, all the payment providers, your Stripes, your PayPals, all in bed together, all colluding to do that. Whereas this new technology and this decentralized Web3 iteration of the internet with blockchain has enabled them to move value across the world in an uncensored manner. So it's had the answer to it in already. That's really important to realize.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side of this, here's where there's obviously an opportunity, and this is another area where I think people really need to get educated fast, because there's a lot of cynicism, skepticism, and I admire any form of skepticism, but when it becomes so strongly cynical that it creates distrust and mistrust without which becomes a barrier to even embracing an idea, that's where things are concerning. But we've been talking about Bitcoin as a potential antidote. We're not here to promote it or sell it to you, but we're here to sell an idea. We're here, in fact, not even to sell an idea. We're here to offer an idea that could provide an antidote to this. Now, there's what made me cringe, the Jamie Dixon, JP Morgan CEO quote. There's a young entrepreneur in the Bitcoin space called Jack Mollers, and his quote is, "Bitcoin will change the world because the world can't change Bitcoin." And I love that phrase because the technology cannot be altered by the powers that be. And okay, there is a fraction of the space that would argue that it can through hard forks and whatnot, but the pure technology itself is distinct and cannot be influenced by sudden centralized government policy. That part is true. Governments can't suddenly increase the number of Bitcoin available in society. They can't operate their policies within it. Now, the challenge is, Sam, is that they cannot operate their policies outside of it. And again, one of the key concerns with central bank digital currencies, again, is that if the money becomes programmable, what's stopping governments from controlling access or exit from, i.e. on-ramp, off-ramp, into and out of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin? Because that is a real risk. You've got the regulatory risks which we've talked about extensively here. So even if the technology itself cannot be corrupted by the central authorities, they have mechanisms above the ground, as I like to say, that could limit and curtail its potential. And that's one of the key concerns that I certainly hold. Yep. And it's a thesis that we consider, I know. How do you address that point, Sam?
Well, we're watching that happen in real time, Dan. It's a roadmap I've been talking about the last 2 years, and we're seeing that. They don't control decentralized blockchains because they are decentralized. That's the whole point. But absolutely, they're talking about controlling, the gates in and out because that's their system. Okay, but what we're seeing really is this double-edged sword where you're seeing particularly in the UK, but this is happening worldwide, and it's worse in the States. The States are really being attacked, and it's a different playing field across the world. Dan, a lot more places are very friendly to it, allowing citizens. So it's not an equal playing field going across everywhere. I'll be really clear about that. States are really cracking down, but obviously, they're limiting people's payments onto these, platforms to move into assets like Bitcoin, using the same line as always for your own safety, right? But I'll give a great example. Santander, limiting payments in the UK to about £3,000 a month onto a crypto platform. Yet at the same time, we have pulled up an article, myself, that they are helping their Swiss private clients buy Bitcoin and Ethereum at the very same time. So what we're seeing really is, rather than it being, and again, who knows how it's going to play out, rather than it be a complete clampdown, this is all legal, you understand, they are positioning themselves. The banks are accumulating, the institutions, we're seeing a huge institutional adoption of these technologies and these assets, whilst they're shutting the smaller player out for their own safety. So it's again, do as we do, not as we, do as we say, but not as we do, one rule for you, one rule for us. So we're seeing that happen. And again, it's not an overnight, this is what's happening, it's gradual. So people have been corralled again, Dan. So if it got to that point where say no one's allowed to be in these assets or whatever, then it becomes dystopian. Because that's a very obvious dystopian move. We talked about that about the central digital currency. If it comes very much, you can't do this. That's very obvious. They're much, they're not. I wouldn't say they're subtle. I mean, it's very obvious, but they're subtler than that. Dan, they're more nuanced than that. Which is, giving you misinformation, confusing about these assets, scaring you out whilst they're accumulating. They don't need to ban you. They're just going to limit you for your own safety. They're going to, not get good education out there about what's happening. You don't understand the shift. Whilst they understand the shift and they are positioning themselves very well. So for the pioneers or the people who are keen to educate, you can find a way, but that's not how it's going to be cleared up in the, in the vast majority of people are not going to get good education or not being aware because they're corralled by the media stories around it and the fear again, they're being leveraged by fear. So yeah, we're seeing that, but absolutely they can't control the decentralized nature of things. But I don't think this is part of my thesis is it's about controlling the masses. Outliers are always doing good things. And that's the same with the internet, Dan. There's always, various things going on. You can try and close everything down, but mostly you want to keep the masses just, complying through their own choice by consenting not to look at other options and be creative. So the people who are going to be creative and proactive are always going to find solutions, always going to be ways to move in, move out, transact. And obviously the other aspect to be aware is once you're on a decentralized blockchain system, you can always transact peer-to-peer within those systems. And we're seeing, some of the big exchanges be attacked like Binance and even Kraken, and again, it's a lot of it's theatre because they're looking just to control much more of the pie because the banks will hold the crypto and you'll go via them. So this will all exist. It's not going to ban it all, but then what do they want to do? Control it as much as they can, take as much of the pie. But we're seeing the rise, and that's something they can't stop, of decentralized exchanges, Dan.
Yep.
And I know I'm going to cover that on one of our future, crypto cafes within the NFR program, showing how actually you can trade, and it is decentralized. There is no centralized entity. There's no company involved. decentralized platforms that you can trade with each other. So there are always ways for the people who get educated and take proactive action. And I think that's the point, to not be in a victim mentality of, I'm not going to take any positive steps because what if? We'll say that what if's gone forever. I always look at the realities, Dan, and we all said there's no panacea, but you're taking better steps. In the last 3 years, whatever you think could happen potentially in 10, 20 years to Bitcoin, that has already helped many, many people I know, has helped many people help many other people, and they wouldn't be able to do it without it. So I look at what's really going on and the positives. How everything's going to play out in the whole long run, no one can call. But that's still making better moves now and using those tools to benefit. And we talk about also, how Web3, which is blockchain, has freed up content creators who are being censored or deplatformed from YouTube or other big platforms, and they are moved to things like Odyssey, which is again decentralized. So again, that's been a great boon. That's been a great use case. But those people have to be proactive, learn that skill, move over, understand the power of Web3 and the decentralized nature. Now, those people haven't been censored. Those same people haven't been censored today. So again, you can argue nothing. They're going to cut down on this, but the reality is happening. There are benefits to be looked at, and I think it's understanding that we are. And again, I don't say you don't have to be pro or against. We are in the adoption phase of a brand new technology that is going to be the value transfer mechanism of the future world for who knows the next few hundred years, how that might play out. That is happening. That's why I always want to say, where do you position yourself within it? And you don't have to get involved. You might position yourself, well, I want to go off grid and try and complete back nature. That's a valid route as well. They're all valid routes. But if you're living in perhaps in a more built up society, and that's where you plan to be, you need to look at maybe how I'm on the better side of things, how I position myself well. And people who understood and get educated have always been able to position themselves well. And there is enormous opportunity in this paradigm shift as well, Dan, which is why people understand it. And you've talked about it in 2008, the crash, that people saw it coming. We always thought crash as if it just has to be a negative thing. It's all going to crash. Well, that system was broke already. Can you pivot and make better changes to your own life and your own situation, the way you transact value, the way you store your wealth, than you did before? This is a great opportunity to do that. And it's one of the biggest opportunities of our lifetime to get ahead of the game and ahead of the curve. And the bottom line, I always say it, that underpins all of it is education. And as you said, Dan, skepticism is really important. You should be a healthy skeptic, as I am, to everything you hear. But what the next step of being a healthy skeptic is then getting involved in the dialogue and the discussion and learning. There's a difference between healthy skepticism and just cynicism, saying I'm not even looking and I'm going to give a very strong opinion, not based on education. And the other thing I wanted to say, then, I see it so much. So many people have understandably been affected by stories they've heard. Oh, I know somebody lost all their money in crypto, lost all their money in Bitcoin, or lost all their money. I always want to say to people, I want to know the story. If you tell me the story, we'll be able to find out exactly why and how. And often it was, very simple to decode, which is, they left it on third-party hands. That company went bust. They bought high because they got sucked in by the hype, and they sold low because they got sucked in by the fear. There will always be a reason, but the stories just float on their own, as if I got into crypto and somebody pressed a button and I lost all my money. So we laugh, but it is that powerful in those stories where there's always a cause and effect, and people who've done it properly haven't done that, haven't lost all their money, or people who got educated haven't. They've done the absolute opposite. So that's where it's really powerful to understand that and not get caught out by, they're good, genuine people sharing a story, but I need to know the details.
Yeah.
If we get the details, it transforms the story completely.
It does. Yeah, because the story in itself promotes the victim mindset, and that's so pervasive in society right now. I mean, it plays out every single day. It to me, it's one of the things I'm most passionate about. We were talking about this with the team yesterday in terms of the future of the podcast and some of the issues we want to tackle. This sense of hopelessness and helplessness that is pervasive, and it's understandable. I can empathize with it, with everything that's happening. But the moment you start to drown in that emotion, you become a victim of the circumstances. Now, we can't control the things that happen outside of ourselves, but we can control how we respond and how we react in a way. The instinctive reaction is something that can be almost knee-jerk, but we can prime our minds, we can prime our emotions, we can prime ourselves to anticipate shocks to the system, so that we know how to respond when they happen. And anything could happen with Bitcoin, because I can imagine I can already see it in the comments. We're not broadcasting live, but I can imagine what's coming out already. I understand. I see all the same things every time we talk about it. The same things, like 4 or 5 things. But we see that, and despite those objections or concerns or criticisms, we still see a pathway to possibility. But similarly, you don't just, if you're investing in stocks, companies, you don't just pick one company and go, oh, that company is gonna, has the real potential to have epic growth over the next decade, and then you just put all your attention in that one company, because there's huge risks in doing that. You've got to diversify. So even by saying we're looking at this asset, Bitcoin, for instance, we're not saying let's just put all our attention into that one asset, because there's a whole range of possibilities that could occur, all of which, including the risks of the on-ramp and off-ramp. I loved your response, Sam, because once you're in the ecosystem, then what are you going to do about it? Government, they will fight. They will make people, and I'll talk about some things. If you go to the history, I'm 40 years old now. I remember Kazaa. Do you remember Kazaa? One of the first music share. Some of the younger people were like, "What are you talking about, mate?" Not that we've got any younger audience at the moment. We're not down with the kids. We're not on TikTok yet.
We're talking back in the LimeWire days, Dan.
LimeWire, Kazaa, Pirate Bay, BitTorrent. All these challenges to challenge the music industry, to make music accessible to people. Now, of course, that was hugely disrupting the system, and of course, not only the power structure, the legal mechanisms, but the industry. Were rallying behind to fight it, because it was a threat to their current control. And inevitably, the same thing is going to happen here. But that's what creates, it's that innovation. It's that decentralized innovation. So we will probably see some things in the next few years which will eventually get wiped out, because Kazaa isn't around anymore, LimeWire, none of those things. BitTorrent's still going strong, Pirate Bay's fighting back. But there are things like Spotify that have emerged, but now Spotify are the machine. Now they're the system that people are rallying against. There's whole documentaries on that. So this is the cycle, but we're moving towards this decentralized approach. So there will be ways for people to transact. This is the rebellion part of this game, because no matter how hard, whenever it's cause and effect. There's another term for it as well, but when it's when the forces of an equal and corresponding resistance. So the government push, we push harder, and we'll see that happen, that tussle, with new solutions that are emerging to make it possible for people to transact within these ecosystems.
And the more people who adopt decentralized things, the more you support them, the more they flourish.
Totally.
So it's the old classic. If you want to raid against big tech and you want to move towards decentralized, whether it's a web browser like Brave or Search like then you are supporting that, and you get more people in the ecosystem, and it flourishes because of network effect. And that's the point. These things are networks, and network effect is more users, more nodes, and that spreads, and that gives it more stability, more growth. It's even harder to control. So again, being stuck in that cynical kind of I'm not going to bother. I think that's where the powers be love that kind of idea of I'm not bothering. The machine's too powerful. That's one of their biggest spells. It's the Wizard of Oz, Dan. Behind the curtain, it's all powerful, can do everything. They want that illusion out there. They want you to believe that. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So understanding that you need to look at that and look at what you can do, and and make those efforts to do that. And there's huge opportunity there.
Absolutely, and, yeah. So your point there about the number of people, we would all agree in a truly democratic system. The people. I mean, it's not devoid of its problems. The tyranny of majority during COVID didn't exactly act in our favor, but the reality is the more people in a democratic system that engage, the more likelihood that the people will get a result that is conducive to the people. When that system is corrupted by a centralized authority that has lobby over the overall democratic process, we know that's problematic. The same analogy is true with this new digital financial realm, because if Bitcoin, for instance, as this decentralized opportunity, this decentralized tool is adopted in mass by the main institutions over and above the retail investor, people like you and I, then they hold all the cards, which is why this is the time to understand that if you want to play in this game and play your part in rebellion, the reality is the more of us that hold on to these decentralized assets, the more power that we have. But what's happening is people's cynicism and skepticism is getting in the way. Now, before we wrap up, Sam, I know we've only got a few minutes left. I just want to share a chart which shows the impact of Bitcoin over the last few months and where it's at right now, because you and I launched a program called the Navigating the Financial Reset Program in March of this year. We've ran 18 different workshops now covering a multitude of things around financial literacy, financial knowledge. We looked at different asset classes from Bitcoin, crypto to property to gold. But Bitcoin was here when we started the program, and now in recent weeks, it's look at this trend.
Yeah.
It's significant rally, and we're paying attention to where this is going. But we started this program here. In fact, just after it reached this low point, because we could see what was happening. We could see a path ahead. Nothing was guaranteed, but we wanted to help people whilst it was at this stage, and it's been in this state of flux for months. But now, of course, now it's rising. Everyone's excited, and this is the classic fear greed index that we talk about. Dan. Like, so we want to prepare people before it gets to this point. The same can be said for gold. We were told we were criticized for talking about gold recently. I have no idea why. I mean, it's like an age-old inflation hedge. And again, the cynicism comes out. Why are we talking about gold? It's like, well, we're talking about gold because we're in a place of financial uncertainty, geopolitical conflict, and almost throughout history, this asset class has been a safe haven against those problems
and protecting your hard-earned value and wealth.
And look at the point here, Sam, where we started talking about it within our program. Again, at a low point, look where it's gone. So, for the people who took heed of that and took action, you're literally making real gains in your financial purchasing power, your net worth. And now the problem is if you don't already have assets to invest, which I thoroughly understand, and we're going to start talking more about ways in the coming months within the program, how we can actually increase our capital, because that's a very real problem that many people face. But again, we've got to take the power back in our own hands and not say, here, government, give me some money to make my life better. Go work for it. Let's find a way to actually innovate, create opportunities for ourselves, because these opportunities are here right now. Now, Sam, we're right out of time. So, we've been talking about these things on the podcast. We're here regularly talking about these things. If you want to work with us in the Navigating the Financial Reset program, just head over to weareelevate.org/NFR. That's weareelevate.org/NFR. You can find out about what we're doing. We're having deeper conversations like this twice a month, looking at the data, looking at the charts, looking at the opportunities, looking at the risk, having holistic and nuanced conversations about this changing financial landscape. Because the hard reality is, and I'm passionate about this, because during the time when I was working in financial services in 08, 09, it was the people who buried their heads under the sand who were the ones that suffered. And it pained me to see people firsthand suffering. So this is your opportunity now. If you're concerned about the state of the world and the state of reality, don't be a passive observer. Now is the time to be an active participant. And there are plenty of things we can do to fight back against central bank digital currencies, but there are also plenty of things we can do to protect our own assets and to create our own opportunities for the path ahead, Sam. So any closing words for you before we wrap
totally,
up?
Dan. And there's so much in those charts, what you want to allude to, which is, again, education and understanding the cycles. So I talk about cycles a lot. So the people accumulating in that low area of Bitcoin, a bear market, this is all very normal. So in the mainstream news, you've heard it's all died, it's all crashed. I shared this story that if you'd bought Bitcoin the day the Economist front cover announced crypto and Bitcoin was dead, you're up 150% in a year. Okay. And so I think what's interesting is if you get educated, and that's what we got covering our workshops. We did one recently on what makes the markets move, because a lot of people have no idea, just think it's, I don't know what's going to do. Understand the cycles. That's why, you're seeing a lot of people understandably now see the market finally move up and they have confidence again. If you get educated, you understood the market has to go back up. This is normal cycles. It's based on money printing, liquidity moving this market, adoption to this market. So once you have that, you can be in this space in a completely different way, Dan. And I've seen people in front of my eyes in talks or in consults are given, the whole paradigm shift just through education. And again, not because I'm saying you need to do anything.
Yep.
I'm not promoting
we haven't advised anyone to buy.
And I never say, and I say what's so interesting is the education shifts your perspective. So give a great example. You talked about all the, can be cynicism or skepticism or even fear, but what's so powerful is educate about where you are now. So I had somebody recently said to me, well, great. And all questions are valid, Dan, aren't they? We embrace them all. Of course, because it's important to have all those thoughts that come up. Somebody said, well, what if I buy Bitcoin and before it goes up, it goes down a bit? Say if I bought 10 grand of Bitcoin, what if it goes down to 8 or 7? What would you be worried? But what's so interesting, that same person didn't realize, as we touched on in a recent episode, Dan, you've already, if you had 50 grand in your bank thinking you were safe, you've already left 7 grand in the last 2 years.
Yep.
But that's the difference. You're worried about Bitcoin fluctuating in the short term over its growth and long term, but you're not got no concern about the only thing I can guarantee you, which is your fiat reserves are going down in terms of your purchasing power. So that's one of the paradigm shifts. You need to be aware about where you're sat. So rather than just kind of that, understand where you are, and that will often shift your view of where you might want to move to or shift some of your value to. So that's really paramount. Be it gold, we talked about people who moved into gold when the fiat dollar took off the gold standard in 71. Those people who moved into gold protected all their hard-earned wealth, their family's earnings, all those things. Your time, your energy, what you want to create in the world. They protected that and did really well. If you stayed in fiat currency, as we said, 50 grand in 1971 is about a grand today or something ridiculous. You were down, 90+% in all these current fiat currencies. So education is the baseline. You don't need to be sold anything. You need to get educated, and then you'll see a different picture emerge. And from there, you'll understand that the people who understand what's going on have always been able to position themselves, always been able to protect their wealth and grow it, riding the right waves. And that's a paradigm shift. That's why, rather than being dystopian and say no one is allowed to do anything in the world, because that would be overly dystopian, they just want you to remain ignorant and corralled by the narratives. You get educated and you free yourself up from those narratives, you are in a completely different position to prosper and do well and take back your power.
Thank you, Sam.
That's the message I want to end on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a heaviness in the world right now, and actually freedom comes with responsibility, and responsibility is often heavy. It can be, because there's a lightness in blaming someone else for your circumstances. It's freeing. There's a freedom that comes from saying it's not my fault. And in some cases, it's true. There are plenty of things that are outside of our control. But when we bring things back to what we can control, we take the power back. That responsibility does come with that need to educate. Awareness is the first step to transformation. Education will bring you choices that you never had before, but you have to make assessments and decisions that you've never had to make before. And that can feel like a burden, but it's really an opportunity. And once you can break through the fears of making those decisions, that's where you can really start to change things for yourself. And that's the opportunity on the table when you start to educate yourself. So we'll be here continuing to talk about these matters. If you'd like to go further, come and join us in the Navigating the Financial Research Program. Go to weareelevate.org/NFR to find out about our sessions. By joining us, you'll get access to all 18 modules that we've covered so far, plus every new session that we do every single month. They're all recorded. There's always a Q&A session. There's always a set of slides and worksheets to support you. So do check that out, and we'll be back in very soon. Let us know your thoughts about this episode in the comments. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you again very soon on the Uncharted Territory podcast.